In the New York Times editorial piece, Discrimination in the Military, the main issue surrounds the unfounded ban on transgender people serving openly in the United States military. Transgender discrimination in the military is a prevalent gender issue, specifically in the United States. It has been up for discussion during the U.S. presidential debates and discussed in popular culture. For example, British talk show host John Oliver dedicated an episode of Last Week Tonight to transgender rights, putting a special focus on discrimination in the military. The article, written by the New York Times editorial board, responds to an interview with the former U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel on ABC's Political Affairs program This Week. The New York Times article argues for lifting the ban on transgender people serving openly in the military. While scrutinizing Hagel's comments regarding this topic, the article also aims to denounce the reasons for having such a ban. In supporting their argument, the writers focus on the fact that the ban has no compelling medical rationale behind it. They also reference former Surgeon General Jocelyn Elders in stating that the absence of such a ban would enable commanders to better care for their service members. They note that the ban forces individuals to leading some to not seek necessary hormone treatment or other health care, in turn risking their physical and emotional health. As well, they focus on the fact that there is no medical reason why transgender individuals would be unfit for duty. Their medical care is no more challenging than any other sophisticated medical care provided by the military system, and they do not need extended time for some cosmetic surgeries. In fact, they are at greater risk for serious post-operative complications. Throughout our presentation, I, Hanna Levett, and my peers Lovline Marcello, Kimberly Donis, and Andrea Moore will discuss this article's consistency or inconsistency with functionalist theory, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionist theory. This will be done by alluding to the case of Sergeant Shane Ortega, a transgender Army sergeant who was forced to wear a woman's uniform despite his decision to identify as a male.
Functionalist theory observes how parts of society function and contribute to the stability of all of society. In order for society to function in a productive manner, all the smaller parts must work and progress with the anticipation that they will fulfill their needs for the larger picture. The fact that transgendered individuals are banned from joining the military is an example of how the functionalist theory is in effect but does not work in benefiting the smaller group in this particular case, but rather the larger group. If one were to apply functionalist theory to the issue of the transgendered ban from the military, it would be observed that the stability of the whole society is not met because certain individuals who wish to serve in the U.S. military are not permitted to do so because of discrimination due to gender orientation. In other words, functionalism is not observed because certain individuals in the smaller group are not given a chance to contribute to the stability of society. The story of Shane Ortega is a prime example depicting the corruption of the functionalist theory within the military. Shane Ortega is a male member of the military who has undergone hormone treatment in order to become the man he is today. But the U.S. military does not accept his gender orientation and therefore forces him to wear a woman's uniform while addressing him as a female. This means that Shane and others alike are unable to fulfill their part in order to sustain a progressive society. In the case that the functionalist theory does not produce order, then society must restructure itself in order to progress. If all goes well, the parts of society produce order, stability, and productivity. If all does not go well, the parts of society then must adapt to recapture a new order, stability, and productivity. It can be observed that in this case, the functionalist theory does not produce order, and as a result, the individuals being affected by this lack of order have put pressure on the government to adapt a new order. This lack of functionalism was observed with the don't ask, don't tell rule regarding gays and lesbians within the military. The group of individuals discriminated by the don't ask, don't tell forced the government to recapture a new order which accepts homosexuals to serve in the military, therefore sustaining their role in the functionalist society. In a perfectly functionalist society, all individuals would be able to join the military. This would then benefit the U.S. government, who now have a substantial amount of people driven to join and fight in the U.S. military. This then means that all of society is better protected with a strong, equal, discrimination-free military.
I will now discuss conflict theory and its relevance to this issue. According to the New World Encyclopedia, in sociology, conflict theory states that society or an organization functions so that each individual participant and its groups struggle to maximize their benefits, which inevitably contributes to social change, such as political changes and revolutions. This particular theory highlights the role of power and its influence on social order. Karl Marx's idea explains that social groups vie for economic resources and that social order is established by superiority of power. It is controlled by those with a strong political influence and those who obtain high economic and social resources. In keeping with this theory, we can relate certain aspects to the discrimination of transgendered participants in the military. In the American military, there's a hierarchy that must be followed and respected. A private must follow the orders of a corporal and anyone above them. A corporal will always respect the directives of a sergeant who would never dare disrespect a warrant officer's decisions led by a captain, and so on. There are specific levels and ranks that remain honored within the military because no one dare intervene with the order of power. This is the same case with conflict theory. The example of the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie is an ideal example. The bourgeoisie, even being the minority in the 19th century, had power over society since being the owners of major factories, producing resources that everyone needed. The proletariat, which was the majority, had labor to offer to those factory owners, but they weren't being compensated nearly enough. Marx suggested that in a society, if one group exploits another group economically, this will lead to its own destruction. Going back to Shane's case, he cannot freely do as he pleases because he must follow a certain order of command. In other words, he is the proletariat that is being mistreated. Shane cannot openly express his true self and must follow certain constraints to remain in the military, such as wearing a woman's uniform. Those who obtain a high position, for instance Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, who represents the minority, have significant say in what can be changed in regards to policy, but choose to avoid the situation. Therefore, those of lower rank, Shane and 15,000 other transgendered military participants, must deal with the restriction of freedom. These types of situations lead to protest and revolt, also known as a form of destruction within society.
Next, Andrea Moore will now be discussing symbolic interactionism and how it is apparent consistently in the editorial Discrimination in the Military and in today's society. Firstly, symbolic interactionism focuses on individuals and the anatomy of their behavior. That behavior and attitude can depend upon how individuals perceive, define, or construct their social world. In the editorial, it is said that roughly 15,000 individuals hide their true identities in order to serve and fight for their country. As stated in Military Times by Patricia Keene, in 2011, lesbian and gay troops were openly allowed to serve in the military, whereas the ban against transgender still stands because gender dysphoria, the term for those who believe they are one gender but born into the body of an opposite gender, was characterized in Defense Department policies as a mental health disorder incompatible with military service. It has been said that complex medical and logistical issue could preclude transgender people from serving in austere combat conditions. Due to the heightened discrimination, many transgender people either deny or are denied the necessary hormone treatment or other medical care, such as Ashley Diamond, further explained in the editorial board. Moving forward, Chelsea Manning, arrested as Bradley Manning, won the right to hormone treatment while she was in prison through national security leak and pressured lawsuit. Shane Ortega, 28-year-old sergeant, has been living as a transgendered man for 5 years now and is a perfect example of how symbolic interactionism has been present in his life. Despite his gender identity for the past 5 years, Shane Ortega has been denied the right to wear a man's uniform while serving in the military. Many individuals in cases like Ortega wish to make the transition, however have been too afraid due to circumstances. Just recently, the Secretary of Defense Ash Carter announced that Pentagon leaders are finalizing plans aimed at lifting the ban on transgender individuals in the U.S. military. Many alongside Ortega believe that everyone who's able and willing to serve should have the full and equal opportunity to do so. As stated in the editorial Discrimination in the Military, the question is how fast can the armed forces join the modern world on the issue, not whether they should.
The article does present some limitations. Since it is an editorial piece, the article does hold a certain bias. Through their use of diction, it is evident that the writers are in favor of lifting the ban on transgender people serving openly in the military. They provide various strong points to support their argument. but do not provide any alternate opinions. For example, when discussing Chuck Hagel's statement that he was open to reviewing the policy, they made assumptions about his priorities and actions, stating, "He did not say whether lifting the ban and when, or even whether such a review might take place. There is none underway, and Mr. Hagel currently has no plan to start one." End of quote. In addition, they don't present any of Hagel's supporting arguments for stating that the complex medical and logistical issues preclude transgender people from serving in austere combat conditions. They simply delve into a rebuttal, leaving out potentially key facts. The article ends by stating that the question at hand is, how fast can the armed forces join the modern world, not whether they should. This brings to light a new question for debate, in turn, leaving no room for alternate opinions or, as they stated, lame excuses.